Hi everyone, I'm Dignitasend. I'm here with the English LPL caster Froskurinn, who's going to talk to us a bit about her last year working for the LPL and her history in esports. Hi Froskurinn.
How are you this morning? It's really early for me.
It's all actually pretty early for me. So, tell us about just how you got into esports or video games in general. What led you into the career that eventually took you to working for the English LPL broadcast?
I know we talked about this kind of before the broadcast, but it's funny because I've been asked this question a lot, but I've never really seen it get out there. And I don't know how relevant the story really is, but I was always a big video game player, like obviously growing up, like most of us were. The game that I actually first played competitively was Mario Kart. Particularly, yeah, people always laugh, but it's funny because I tell people that I was like really into competitive Mario Kart, and they're like, "What competitive? That doesn't exist. I bet I could beat you." And then all of my friends in college like refuse to play with me. Um, that's like literally just sit down with me for like 5 minutes and be like, "Fuck this game!" Throw the controller. Um, but like I've always been like obsessive in games with that extent. Mario Kart was like really the big first one. I traveled to a lot of tournaments to participate in that. Um, it's always weird because I watch like the Smash Brothers documentary and I'm like, I remember that tournament. I didn't participate in Smash Brothers, but there was a Mario Kart shit that was happening really close to it. And so you kind of feel good about yourself, but then you remember that you just played Mario Kart and no one really cares. Um, but I got specifically into League of Legends around college time. One of my friends had keys into the beta, and I had never played a computer game ever before in my life. I remember like using the control scheme for the first time and be like, why can't I move with the arrow keys? What is this bullshit? Where's my like ASDW? Um, and but from there I was just kind of hooked. I played probably right after Nidalee was released. I think that was like kind of the first champion that really sold it for me. And I just remember conversations like when Kassadin was being released and you saw like the galaxy come through his sword, how cool that was. And oh man, Olaf's so broken. Do you know his DPS output is just crazy ridiculous if he hits all of his axes? And so I played with a couple of different clans at the time. I think that was, I don't know if that was ever big, but I remember all the 3v3 Twisted Tree Line tournaments. I played for an organization called Lazura, and I played for an organization called Four Not. And Four Not later on became Quantic Gaming. I played with the likes of Bloodwater, Kramer, what was it, Big Bad Broad, kind of like those guys. And that time period, I was on their B team. And then we kind of got screwed over by a manager, and that was kind of my first taste of the corruption of
That
esports.
never happens.
Yeah, it was pretty sketchy. And so it was funny because when I heard that all of those, because later on, Quantic was having issues with some of their management. Of course, there was that big issue with the players when they were trying to qualify themselves. But I actually, the very first thing that I ever published, I wrote a big long thing, and this was like before the days of Reddit. This was like a general discussion that was when that was actually a thing about infrastructure problems in esports because I had firsthand experience like this manager who was completely unqualified to be in that position within the organization just rip off a bunch of players and cause so much drama and hardship. And I'm sitting here thinking like, if this continues to get bigger, if these organizations continue to set up like this, then we're gonna have massive problems. Um, so after I kind of got burned in that scenario, I actually decided to stop playing. I mean, I think the highest that I ever got wasn't that. I mean, it was before Master and Challenger, so it was much harder. Not harder because obviously we had the ELO system, but I think like the highest that I ever got was only like Diamond One, so not great on that perspective scale, but I tried. You try to be a professional player, but I was just never good enough. So I stopped attempting that with like trying out with teams, and I started into streaming. And coaching didn't exist at the time that I was really doing this. I called it commentary. And so what I would do is right as the spectate feature was released, I would go onto, again, the general discussion boards because Reddit didn't really exist. And I would ask if anyone wanted their game spectated by a high elo player to give commentary or feedback on. And so what ended up happening is I would get these viewers and I would spectate their games, and I had like so many different matchups. I'd be every single different type of champion matchup, every single different type of ELO, like everything from like bronze to diamond. And I created like a library effectively in my I think this was like the days of Owned and Twitch, like that was still around at that point. But I created like a library of like hundreds upon hundreds of videos because I would cut and edit them individually for the viewer to go back and kind of watch. And then I thought, I might be decent at casting. And so I quickly transitioned and contacted ESL because ESL was actually fairly relevant at that time period. At least their North American branch. Obviously, their European branch is very big, but Go4LOL was the big tournament. And so I contacted ESL and I tried out with a guy named Tasty Nubbins, who was a great caster. Unfortunately, he's not casting anymore. And they hired me and then put me underneath this guy named Spell Ruler, who I think might still be casting in the European scene. He's also a great guy, as kind of like a mentor. And the big thing in ESL, at least in the North American branch, because it's not as well established as the European branch, is what's called the EPS. And if people don't know what the EPS was, it's the Electronic Pro Series, and it was effectively the North American Challenger Series before the NACS even existed. It was the tournament where they sent out invitations, or you qualified through Go4LOL to participate in a bigger, higher-end Challenger team kind of tournament. So obviously that was kind of like their main draw. And the reason why it was a big deal in the ESL North American branch is because that was the only paid position for a caster at the time. And so that was kind of like the big leagues. And my first year of casting with ESL, I decided I was convinced to try out for that position. Formerly, it had been held by kind of like the same guy. These are going to be guys like Malphus X, EGAD, Azumu, who else? Tasty. Nubbins had it for a very long time. But I was very fortunate in that with all of like my support structure that I was actually able to qualify for the EPS. And another guy qualified for the EPS and his name was Pyrotechnics. And that was actually how Pyro and I met, is we casted at the ESL together and we got the EPS together. And then really from there, Zyrene, that's what it was. I don't know if... I assume now, kind of looking back at the timeline, that Zyrene was probably scouting and prepping for the North American Challenger Series, which is why he was watching the games. But we were casting games together because it was just on a rotating shift. You never had the same partner. And Pyra and I happened to be casting this set together, and Zyrene was in the chat. And he liked what we were doing, so he contacted us immediately after the set, and he just gave us some pointers and some tips. And kind of, it was like our first kind of brush with Riot, not with Riot directly, but kind of with a more experienced caster, because I think Zyrene, right before I had joined the ESL, was actually picked up from ESL himself, although I would have to double check on his history. But I just remember hearing stories of like, man, if only you were here when Zyrene was here, you guys could have gotten picked up together or brought up together. So don't worry, Zyrene, they were still talking about you at ESL. Yeah, and so Zyrene reached out to us, told us that he really liked what Pyra and I were doing. So we decided to become more of like a duo cast and to try to cast everything together, just because we thought, okay, if this is working, and Zyrene seems to think that it is, we can take his advice and we can learn on it and push forward. So we picked up a project for the LPL to do in our downtime to practice for the EPS. And then from there, it was pretty much history. I don't know if that was the medium version. I think I rambled. I'm sorry.
That's good. That was a good version of that. So then the last year or so, you've been working on the LPL English Broadcast. If you want to share, I think a lot of us, understand where that came from and the moves to make an English broadcast in the LPL. But do you have anything you want to share of your personal, step up into that, or its creation that you think is worth talking about?
I mean, I definitely think that. I mean, this sounds super arrogant to say, but I definitely think that there is a lot of lessons to be learned from the LPL EN. At least, even what we did with the project. Like, even if you didn't like the LPL, even if you hated the casting, even if you dislike me, I still think that the lessons learned there are fairly important for the community, and particularly for starting leagues like that. It's funny. People say that you've been casting for the past year, and yeah, I've been casting for, I think, like 2 years now, in terms of starting with ESL, going to EPS, LPL EN, and now LPL. But I've actually only been professionally casting in terms of working with Riot or under a contract for 13 weeks. Yeah, and when you say it like that, people are like, huh, it's not that long. And I've definitely if this is your 2-year span and this is like your 13-week span, like the amount of growth over this course has been like astronomical versus the amount of growth over this course, simply because of, you have the resources and the peers to work with, like Pace Your Time and Spawn and Rusty and everyone at the Oceanic crew, and having the resources that Riot provides to you for training and things like that. So I'm very grateful, but obviously I recognize that I have a lot of work to do as a caster. But I'm pleased with the growth that I've made in a short amount of time, because I've only cast professionally for one split, and that was just summer. But in terms of LPL EN, the thing with LPL EN is it was just like a grassroots project. Like literally, we took a stream. I remember that Spell Ruler and I were actually casting together, because Kelsey was a good friend of mine. I was a good friend with a lot of the China Talk people because I was doing the show for them, hosting. And when I started that show, I had no idea anything about China. Like I just had no idea they needed a host. And they convinced me that they wanted to do an English LPL stream, but they needed a shoutcaster, and I was the only shoutcaster that they knew of at the time. And so I remember we were doing just trying to figure out the mechanics of it, and we were actually using my buddy Spell Ruler at the time. And there's still videos of him and I casting and like not knowing anything, like on YouTube, and Kelsey just sitting in the background like, no, that's wrong, this is awful, this is terrible. But after we kind of like refined it, because you have to think, we took a stream from literally 8 people were watching it, and I think our grand total was 48,000. And the stream was run by literally 2 people. So there was Pyrotechnics and I as the casters. I did all of the overlays and any of the graphic work if we weren't relying on the stream, so anything that you're using in between. And then Kelsey ran the OBS and was like our entire like production and everything. And that was it. And I remember when we did the finals, which was super awesome of Twitch to reach out to us, because obviously it was a big thing for Twitch. Because if we were able to be successful, which Twitch determined that, I mean, Garby thought that we were very successful. He works with Twitch. He's one of their, I don't know what his exact title is, Wizard of eSports. That might actually be on his business card if you've ever met him. He's a great guy. But he just reached out to us, and he was trying to give us like tips on how to set up like a brand. And it was really important because that's literally what Twitch is about. It's about creating your own content, your own brand, and selling that. So you can imagine how excited Twitch would be if a bunch of these kind of third-party streams set up for English casts, like the Brazil League, the Japanese League, the LPL. I mean, or in any different language, in French and German, like they wanted this to set up, and we were kind of like that testing ground for it, or trying to prove. Obviously, Riot stepped in and they wanted the rights to the LPL broadcast and the English rights in general to any stream. I know that Brazil was trying to set up so they could cast an English stream, because right now I think the only stream available is the Portuguese one, and Riot actually closed that down, and I think a lot of that was from the lessons that they learned with LPL EN and kind of the hardship of transitioning a brand over from like a third party into an official avenue. I'm not gonna lie, it was super frustrating at first. I think the big issue was just it's so hard to, when you're such a small party, communicating with like a much larger being like Riot and trying to get like those dates sorted, because it was just a scenario of we'll let you know if we're taking this by December. Sorry, I think a car just drove by dragging cans. No idea, someone's getting married. And it was just kind of like the date kept getting pushed back, because Pyra and I, like literally we were not living together. So what Pyra and I would have to do for LPL EN is we'd have to load up a Chinese stream, and we'd have to try to sync it. And that was almost impossible. It's fairly easy to do over Twitch for whatever reason, but the Chinese streams, because one person can lag, it was just like a nightmare. And then we'd have to get into Skype, so we couldn't see each other's facial expressions. And casting, what's really key about that is there's a lot of cues. Like if I'm on a desk with someone that I can see and I want to make a point or I want to take a handoff, I can tap the desk. And obviously over Skype, you can't do that. It's just you're just listening to someone. So it's much harder to do. Obviously, if you're not in a live environment, there's no hype to feed off of. It's very, it's generated. It's not natural. I mean, you try to make it sound as natural as possible. We would wake up at 9 p.m. and we would stay up till 9 a.m. and we'd have to do this every single weekend so like you have to be quiet. I remember Pyrotechnics was trying to like soundproof his room because he didn't want to disturb his neighbors. And I guess like his neighbor was a giant pothead and was cool with it anyway. Like there was one point where he just had his window open, and we're like, and in between games, we're trying to eat as quickly as possible because we're just like dead to the world, and you have like those crazy breaks or pauses, and Pyro would be like, "Yeah, I'm just like sitting nude in my room right now, and I think my apartment or my neighbor's hotbox out of his mind because he keeps waving at me." Like these are the conversations that we're having in between the games, or like we're sleeping on our desks. But trying like, and obviously you want that to go to Riot, and so I was super happy when Riot picked up LPL EN from a production standpoint, because yes, finally the LPL is going to get the production that it desires, it's going to get the attention that it desires, or excuse me, that it deserves, and it's going to become like, you know, more streamlined like the LCS. Like I wanted that to happen. The thing that I didn't want to happen is I obviously wanted to go with the LPL as soon as it was picked up, because I felt that, you know, I had taken all of this time to raise something from the ground up, and then would have liked to at least wrote it or helped out. So there was definitely frustration with that in terms of the communication. But the first thing that I did as soon as I heard that it was going over to the Oceanic team is I just like got online and I added the Oceanic guides. I was like, how can I assist you?
Oh.
And they were actually, it was funny, they were actually fairly surprised. I remember I was having a conversation with, I think it was Atlas, and Atlas was like, you know, I'm actually really surprised that you're acting this way, because I had heard certain things and you're nothing like I had thought you would be like. And I was like, I think that's a backhanded compliment, but I don't know, I think people assume that I'm kind of a bitch. Is that true?
I don't know. Let's go to the next question. So you said at one point you went from 8 to 48,000 viewers. And then, you know, recently you were casting IEM. Did you ever get like stage fright, or just?
I get stage fright every time.
Even now?
Before interviews, yeah, I actually get jittery. I was in high school. I did speech and debate, specifically dramatic interpretation and after dinner speaking, which, if you're familiar with speech and debate, is like pretty much emo acting and comedic speaking. After dinner speaking typically has to have like a meaning or a commentary on social issues, however, but it's very like humorous. So I'm used to speaking in front of big crowds, but it's actually kind of scary because it's very different when you're speaking to a camera or you're working with a camera versus working with an audience. Like I would actually much rather prefer being on a stage and working with an audience or working with a small group of people than working with the camera a lot of the time. But I do get nervous.
So casting IEM, you know, rather recently was probably the first exposure a lot of people got to your casting, because, you know, the LPL English stream is still rather small compared to, you know, an ALCS stream and stuff. So there was a, you know, fair amount of backlash on Reddit, and you gave a pretty good response, you know, about that. But what were your just general thoughts on your first time casting, you know, on such a huge stream, and then immediately having the kind of, I guess to put it nicely, feedback that you can get from, you know, the community in general, and what are you hoping to change, or what did you really like? What did you enjoy about doing such a huge event where so many more people are, so many people who wouldn't specifically watch LPL but are now, you know, seeing you cast on such a big stream?
I mean, obviously, first and foremost, I'm incredibly grateful and honored to work with the crew that I did at IEM Cologne. I mean, this is such like a PR answer, but in all honesty, working with talents like Chobra is so smart, and he's so well-rounded in all of his experiences. And so anytime you ever get to meet that guy, he's like one of the nicest guys. He's super intelligent. He's been through pretty much every facet of the industry. And so that in itself, like not even just casting or being on the event, but being able to network, connect, and communicate with Chobra was like a huge plus. Obviously, I was super stoked too because I got to hang out with Christopher Papa Smithy Smith, one of my good friends, Devin Pyrotechnics Young, another one of my huge good friends, and I got to meet Mitch, and I totally will space Mitch's last name, but the Australian Ubershouts. He works for the ESL, and he was kind of like the I mean, people call him the non-League of Legends caster that was on. I remember when the announcement was released, and everyone's like, who the is this guy? But he was really cool, you know, working with the ESL staff in the studio. It's so... Have you ever been to that studio? Oh, it's so cool. So obviously they used to hold the EULCS there, and it's very tiny. I understand why, people prefer that the EULCS is now moved into the Riot studio. It's much bigger. You can accommodate, but it creates like a very intimate setting. I mean, that thing will only seat about 25 people, maybe max. I don't know. I didn't count the seats, but it's very tiny. Like you're right there, and there's walkways, and you can kind of go into like a lounge area, and ESL will bring food in for guests to eat, like pizza or McDonald's or stuff like that, and people will kind of be lounging around on couches, and it just creates like this really cool, intimate, festive vibe where you get off the desk and you can immediately walk over and you can watch the game with a bunch of different fans, but it's not like so overwhelming. You can have like one-on-one conversations, which I really enjoyed the vibe of that, and kind of like the office structure in general. So that was really cool. In terms of actually getting to cast IEM and the backlash and everything, I definitely will agree that my cast with Uber Shouts was actually my much better cast. So, I mean, I don't want to be like, I didn't do that terrible, because obviously there were problems. Obviously, there's always going to be room for improvement. Again, I've only casted professionally for like 13 weeks. How to say this? I think I understand what my weaknesses are better than anyone else. And of course, I always accept and love constructive criticism. I'm actually like a super critical person, and I love getting as much feedback as possible. So it was cool that the community, that so many people did reach out to me to try to give pointers, but you have to take it with like a pinch of salt. How to explain it? Using Reddit as a tool is incredibly important, because it's a place where a bunch of information is condensed, but you kind of have to understand how to use it as a tool. The example that we always like to bring up is constantly, what we typically like to do is when we go into LPL threads, if no one says anything about the casters, we're like, yes, we did our job perfectly. Like, we don't need threads of like, man, Rusty is awesome, Froskurinn's amazing, fucking love these casters. Like, if we go into like an LPL spoiler thread, as long as no one's like, these casters fucking suck, we hate them, as long as it's just like, oh, Masters 3, they really dropped the ball, OMG looks terrible this time, EDG, yay, we're like, okay, yeah, no one said anything about us, we did our job, it's perfect. But if people are constantly like, these casters don't know anything, and that's kind of like a big thing that we get a lot is these casters don't know anything. Well, we as a casting team, we understand that, okay, we do know things about League of Legends. I mean, there's like a bar to get hired for this job. A lot of us, Rusty was an ex-professional player. He's, I think, ranked in Master right now. Spawn has been a coach for multiple teams as well as an analyst. I've coached for multiple teams as well as an analyst. So we've gotten jobs before our casting jobs that have like a bar line of knowledge. And I'm not saying that we don't fuck up, because every caster fucks up. Like, sometimes you lose what you're doing on air, and you just say stupid shit sometimes. But so if you get this feedback, these casters don't know anything, how you have to define that is, okay, obviously our audience doesn't think we know anything. So what does that mean in terms of like casting? And typically what I found is it's the difference between macro points and it's the difference between micro points. A macro point is going to be map objective oriented, making a rotation, as you would call it, or cross mapping, as Purple likes to say, whereas micro is going to be anything that's mechanically defined. So champion interactions or spell interactions or how something goes down. And if you throw out micro points, people seem to get very excited or use this as like a baseline of this guy knows what he's talking about. Which is funny too, because if you think about Monte Cristo, everyone has this general acceptance that Monte is a very intelligent caster, which he is. But Monte, if you ever listen to him cast, he does not touch micro points. And I mean, I think this is very smart. I don't know like the in-depths of it, but I'm assuming that no one, like, he's probably sat down with his co-casters. I know when I sit down with a co-caster, I'm like, don't ask me this, don't ask me this, ask me this, I want to talk about that. But we do that because every caster has their specialty. But like, go listen to Doa and Monty cast, go listen to Papa Smithy and Monty cast. Monty will never be like, this is how intimately this champion interaction works. He's all macro, very intelligent in terms of what the teams want to do. Whereas if you look at someone like Freak is very micro oriented. He's the numbers guy. He's great rune page breakdowns and things like that. So it's taking that feedback from Reddit and saying, okay, so what do they actually want from us? Like, if this is what they think, then how do we actually deliver that?
Okay. And well, I guess then the second part of my point was just like, what's it like suddenly having, because the LPL English stream, probably won't get that level of criticism. So what's it like suddenly having such a huge number of people seeing you? And then I guess it goes back to my stage fright question as well, just knowing that like this many people just saw you and it's so much more than before. How does it help you to interpret what they're saying, just knowing that there's, probably triple, quadruple, 10 times the number of people watching that and giving you feedback compared to the relatively small LPL community, which is probably a lot of the same people, giving the same feedback or, seeing the same stream?
Um, First and foremost, when you are on broadcast, no one is reading Twitch chat. No one is. We don't know. We have no idea. Like I would.
It's probably
I
for the
mean,
best.
well, there were times when you'd look over at Chobra and you'd be like, "Oh, what's our viewer count at?" And Chobra would be like, "Fuck if I like, I don't know." Like, we don't know. We don't have any sort of uh, production in front of us where we can check that. So it's not really even a facet when we're on camera or we're preparing for things. I mean, normally, if I'm on the desk, I'm looking at Yamoto and Dexter, and I'm like, what points do you want to cover? What do you want to take? And it's funny too. Like, I don't know if people kind of understand. I don't want to like make this sound like super backhanded. I'm trying to think of like the most politically correct way to say this. I'm like really bad at that. I don't know if you can tell. um, I don't think that there's a big understanding about how things actually work on a broadcast or how things actually work behind scenes in terms of prep, in terms of pressure, and in terms of organization. I mean, obviously, like the scripting joke is a perfect example of that, and how that. I mean, it's funny, obviously, but that's not how it works at all. When we're doing a desk, you're watching a game together because effectively you do the analyst desk, you do picks and bans for ESL, which is kind of interesting. And then you stand up or you can sit at your monitor and you can watch the game and you can talk to people and talk to your colleagues, and then you kind of come back right before you think the game is ending. You say, okay, I think this point was important. I think this is the overarching narrative and I want to talk about this. And the host, in that case it was Chober, is like, okay, we're going to go to you first, and then tap if you have something. And if Chober wants to take the point and move it along, you just his hand, he'll point, and pretty much just means like it's coming back to him. So I mean, nothing's like scripted. It's not like we have a teleprompter in front of us, but you do kind of like organize your thoughts about how you want to go about it. In terms of the lashback, I'm not gonna like bullshit. I was really hard. Like that really sucked. And there was a moment at IEM where I did like break down. Because the thing is like obviously I'm not like on Reddit while I'm doing it. At best, like you'll get cell phone reception, and so you'll like check Twitter or you'll have it signed into Skype. And I cannot tell you the amount of messages that I got. So obviously, Twitter is a much more funneled gate in terms of the feedback that you're getting, because you can choose who you want to see or who, you could mute and block people. So there's typically a lot more like positive feedback typically when I use Twitter as a tool, which is why I prefer to use it. But the amount of people that I got like just added me out of the blue to tell me like how much I sucked and how much they hated me, and that you get all these messages saying like, don't check. So I know that something's going on Reddit because everyone's telling me like don't check it. This is disgusting. And so, but like I already know that, and unfortunately for me, I'm one of those people that I love constructive and harsh criticism, but I take the day 9 approach. I can't go into those threads. Like I can't go and sit down and read them. So I typically send like a friend, like I'll go like, hey, Sifa, Daniel Dracos. And I'll be like, can you just go through these threads and explain to me like if there's anything worth like what I need to take out of that, like if there's anything that constructive that you see overall, or ask Kelsey to go in and do it. But like straight up, I totally did cry that day. That was pretty awful. The cast itself, it was Fnatic versus Xiaogu. The big feedback points is that they thought I was talking too much, they didn't like the sound of my voice, and they thought that I was really hard on the Xiaogu Reapers when they decided to make that teleport play at Baron as opposed to ending the game. Those were the kind of the big 3 ones that I saw. And there was actually like a dedicated thread to like pointing out every single time Pirate and I made like a mistake. There was like 4 threads that day. It was pretty not fun. Which the explanation of why I didn't touch Fnatic, because I can't watch any at Worlds. I had Worlds tickets to pretty much every single event, and I didn't go to any Chinese games. And the reason why I don't go into any Chinese games or I don't watch any of the Chinese games live is the immediate lashback that I get in terms of like if a Chinese team does poorly or loses. I just like it's just not something that I enjoy or particularly care about. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm the actual jungler for LGD or something with the amount of like, yeah, I was the one that, Vi circled. What was he doing? He power fisted into XPEK Shockwave. Like he just stood in a circle and like turned around and oh TBQ. God bless. But I don't know. I don't watch any of the Chinese games live because I just have to get off social media at those points. I don't check any Reddit or Twitch chat things when I'm streaming on broadcasts, and I think now it's almost getting to the point where I can't have any social media in front of me at all. And I understand that being in the public, it's par for the course, and I understand that the Fnatic versus Xiaogu game wasn't my best cast. I mean, obviously, you should never have like your best cast. Obviously, there's a baseline standard where you're like, I want this to be acceptable. But you're constantly looking for, okay, what can I do? How can I retro this? Which is, like review and go back and feed. But I don't
know. Okay. Do you have any final remarks or shoutouts you'd like to make before we wrap it up?
I want to thank everyone at IEM Cologne. Working with the ESL guys was incredible. I hope that I get to work with them in the future. If not, I think everyone should strive to work at one of those events, especially working with Chobra. Spoke very highly of him. It was really cool. I obviously always love working with my peers like Papa Smithy, like Pyrotechnics. Big shout out to the Riot Oceanic branch. That's going to be Jake Spawn Tiberia, Max Atlas Anderson, Zach Rusty Pie, and Julian Pastry Time Carr. Those guys are incredible. Julian and Atlas are two of the best play-by-play casters in the world. Their amount of talent is incredible. I love talking to Jake and Rusty. They're very intelligent people. And just the Oceanic branch in general has been so fundamental in helping my development, not only as like a professional, but also as like a person. So I very much appreciate them. And thank you to you. Obviously, I have a history with Dignitas. And every time I interview with you, it's always pretty enjoyable. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all Team Dignitas sponsors. Good luck with casting this season. And I'll see everyone later.
Hey guys, what's up? And welcome back to another Team Dignitas interview. Today we have...
And the most requested Pantheon was the Japanese one. So we're very excited to announce that beginning in January of 2016,